you focus a lot on energy these days. How important is this to not only in itself for the economics of it, but also on the security front?
Great. Thanks, Daniel. And of course, thank you to The Economist for having me back. Really delighted to be here, and it's been wonderful to see so many friends and spend some time together. I think it's useful, first of all, to put in context where we are right now. Reminder, the world is now navigating the largest disruption of global energy supplies of the modern era. More than 1 billion barrels of oil taken off the market. The good news is that markets have demonstrated flexibility. Many countries have stepped forward. The shock, I think, has been less severe than many would have predicted if we had drawn this scenario on February 26th, before this all began. The bad news is that I think the degree of uncertainty that we're living with now is the new normal. And events over the last 24 hours are a vivid reminder of that. And I was really struck by Foreign Minister Gera Petriti's comment this morning, which I think is exactly right, that the war in the Gulf has given Iran a power that it didn't know it had. So the US military campaign massively degraded Iranian capabilities from a military standpoint, but it also unleashed this new power, which is the power to control the Gulf. I was very glad to hear Minister Dendias speaking so clearly this morning on the risks of accepting any kind of a tolling arrangement controlled by Iran across the Strait of Hormuz. As the minister said, this would set a terrible, terrible precedent for global commerce, and I think in particular for Greece and Greek shipping. I regret that the Trump administration has not been as clear on that principle as the Greek Minister of Defense was. It's a particular honor to be sitting next to the two ministers, but especially Minister Shukri, because I think, Daniel, on your question, one of the important stories for the day after this new era of uncertainty is the huge opportunities for the East Med region. And I congratulate Prime Minister Mitsotakis and the entire Greek government for the progress that you're seeing with ExxonMobil, with Chevron. Chevron in particular, a company I'm working closely with now, which is deeply involved in Cyprus, in Egypt, moving ahead with Greece, looking at Libya, looking at Syria. You can say much the same regarding ExxonMobil. This is a game changer for the region, and I think Minister Shukri can speak better than others in terms of how important these new relationships have become for Egypt, but also for Egypt's relationship with Israel, for Israel's relationship with Jordan and the role of the Fajr pipeline. So I think it's a very dynamic period on these issues, and then especially because Deputy Prime Minister Nimiria is here with me also, I would emphasize that Greece has been playing a catalytic role not only vis-a-vis these East Med relationships, but also across the vertical corridor, a project that I've been involved with since the beginning. I was very glad to hear multiple ministers yesterday talking about the vertical corridor as a Greek government priority, but I know it's also a high priority for Ukraine and for the Ukrainian government, and will be even more important as we look to 2027 and a really historic decision by the EU member states to phase out all Russian energy.
So very quick follow-up, because we want to be as concise as possible, but there's all this talk of corridors, and Greece is well placed for corridors. The trouble with the corridors is that there are neighbors and obstructions in the corridors of a political nature, as you well know. So just in a very broad brush sense, do you think those obstructions are diminishing or growing right now? Are we in a period where corridors can actually function as corridors or and not just as potential corridors?
I think the answer to the uncertainty is markets. And the markets are impelling the political leaders to clear away the obstacles. And I think 2027 and the phase out of Russian gas is going to produce a further spike in demand, which will further incentivize bureaucrats and governments to smoothen the way. And then you also have looking to the future, and I know Minister Nimiria will speak about this. When the war comes to an end and Ukraine turns to the task of reconstruction, you're going to see a huge spike in demand from that country as well. And I'm excited about the fact that some of the Greek companies that I know well are now looking at commercial opportunities to be part of that reconstruction story in Ukraine in the sectors of energy, infrastructure, Miltech, as we heard from Minister Dendias this morning.
Very good. Shukri.
Well, thank you very much. Let me also convey appreciation to The Economist for inviting me. I appreciate the depth of the discussion, and I'm very happy to participate. The insecurity that has developed related to energy, I think, has had a very negative impact on the global economy, and has, of course, impacted more those vulnerable nations that have a dependency and a deficiency in terms of their energy resources to begin with. Those conflicts, of course, and those situations were expounded by the war in Ukraine, the situation in Gaza, the continuance of the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians, and most recently, of course, the situation in Iran, and its evolution and its fragility of the agreement that was reached, the Memorandum of Understanding, and the fluctuation in the price of energy has also had its detrimental effect on many states, especially those like Egypt, which is a net importer of energy. The issue is to resolve those conflicts on the basis of political solutions to them all, so as to create an environment where, first of all, we can address the issues of energy insecurity and the compounding factor on food insecurity as well, and other areas in terms of industrialization, in terms of production that depends on petrochemicals. And that in itself is going to be a challenge in view of also the declining energy reserves, strategic reserves in most of the countries of the world. So we, I think, are bound to have a period of instability that will continue with us. And the resilience that was mentioned, of course, has been a positive development, but I think also that the consequences have not been fully grasped or evaluated as such, and we're going to have to deal with those as they evolve. The areas, again, of cooperation that are a potential for dealing with energy insecurity are potentially related to the resolution of conflicts, whether it's Gaza, whether it's the situation in Iran, the consequences of Iran and how it has been emboldened by this condition, and the vulnerabilities that have been exposed in the Middle Eastern domain and beyond are all issues that I think we're going to have to contend with. And they have a correlation to the issues of energy security or insecurity, which will have to also be addressed. But primarily, it is the resolution of those issues through diplomatic means. It is the end of the ongoing instability and unpredictability of the situation, whether in terms of military conflict, but in terms of policy. What is exactly the policy of the current US administration vis-a-vis the security architecture, not only in the Middle East, but beyond the Middle East, in Europe, the transatlantic relationship and how it is developing and its impact. We believe that there are always upsides and downsides to all issues, and here we see a more assertive Europe potentially that will have an impact on our region if it does become more assertive, more self-reliant. A European Union that has traditionally always been strongly associated to the Middle East domain, but that needs to exert more policy initiatives that can have an impact on the resolution of those conflicts and thereby having a positive impact on the issues of energy security. But the cooperation and the integration in the region that opens the doors of cooperation, whether between states of the region or with the private sector, as was mentioned, with companies like Exxon and like Chevron, is going to still depend on the matter of the stability of the region and the resolution of primarily the Middle East, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. the integration of Israel depends on the creation of a two-state solution, which seems farther from attainment today than at any other time due to the policies of the current Israeli government and their declarations of the refusal to implement that resolution. So we have to still contend with the geopolitical issues that remain challenging and see how we can manage them. But certainly there is a huge potential for cooperation, whether it's Egypt, Cyprus, Greece, whether it's the interconnectivity, whether it's the Eastern Mediterranean Gas Forum. All of these are areas which have potential of being impactful in not only providing energy security, but also in providing resolution to many of the issues that have plagued the Eastern Mediterranean and the Middle East at large.
Thank you. Well, you talk about a more assertive Europe. What about a more assertive Egypt? Is that something that we can expect to see on the diplomatic front?
I would think that Egypt has been as assertive as it can be without resorting to assertion that would not be helpful.
But it's such a big country in the region, and yet sometimes it seems to be not at the heart of the diplomatic.
Well, Egypt was part of the quartet that was able to reach the Memorandum of Understanding. Egypt has very strong ties to the United States, to our allies in Europe, has a very deep relationship with its Middle Eastern partners in the Gulf, and has utilized all of its channels of communications with Iran, with Turkey, with the Pakistanis to try to resolve the issue on the basis of finding a point of convergence that deals with the interests of all those concerned. I don't want to evaluate to what extent the conflict or the initiation of that conflict was to the detriment of US policy. It was certainly brought about by very clear interests on the part of the Israeli government, but it was, I think, in the final analysis, very negative in the emboldening of Iran, its utilization of the closure of the Strait of Hormuz to extract further benefit, but also its ability to wage an asymmetric war that seems to have had quite a severe impact on the stability and security of the Gulf states.
Good. Mr. Nemiria.
Yeah, thank you, Daniel, very much. And I would like to start with appreciation of for Nectaria and her The Economist team for having this roundtable for 30 years. And for me, as a Ukrainian politician with Greek roots, it's always good, great, exciting to be here in Athens in this excellent location in Lagonisi. 30 years is a good age. So it gives you a perspective, but still you already have some experience. You're not just someone who could be led by advice, either external or internal. So this is a good departure point for at least next 30 years. Topic which is extremely important. I noticed that yesterday several colleagues already mentioned that energy equals security. So it's true. And Ukraine learned this during the war, paying high, very high price for this lesson on their own experience. Because it is not anymore separate policy areas. So it's overlapping, increasingly overlapping. And sometimes, especially in winter time, it's the same. Energy equals security, and security equals energy. So, but precisely because we have Ukraine obtained this wartime experience in the area we are currently discussing, we feel responsibility now to share our experience, which goes beyond, far beyond Ukrainian borders. Not just for Europe, because Ukraine is Europe, but as the Iran war showed, the part of our experience appreciated and in demand in the countries beyond European geographical borders. Very frequently, question is put how Europe can help Ukraine. It's still a very important question, not just to ask, but even more important to answer. But I would like to put the opposite question now, based on what I just said. How Ukraine can help Europe? What Ukraine has in its possession that is important for Europe's safety, security, confidence? So this is the question I would like to answer. And start with the area which is not very comfortable for politicians to discuss. What our mistakes we made, what the lessons we learned that could be of help to others, not to repeat the mistakes, and to utilize in a constructive way this experience. The first is probably banal and naive, and it's, I believe, I hope, already been learned. The first lesson is that over-dependence creates vulnerability. Because over-dependence, especially in the energy supply, gives your would-be enemy a political leverage. The first time I personally experienced this was on the 31st of December of 2008. I was already with my family, so it was 10 p.m., 31st of December 2008, when I got a phone call from Prime Minister Tymoshenko, Yulia Tymoshenko. Said, Grigory, come back to the office, to the Cabinet of Ministers. President of the European Commission, Barroso, is going to call in 10 minutes. So I came just on time of the phone call, and President Barroso just informed Prime Minister of Ukraine that he just has had a phone conversation with Putin, Prime Minister of Russia at that time, who informed him that at midnight, Russia will stop Gazprom, will stop supplying gas to Ukraine. And then on the Orthodox Christmas, on the 7th of January, Russia stopped supplying transiting gas to Europe. And many countries, many colleagues from countries, especially Balkan countries, Bulgaria, Bosnia, Serbia, Moldova also country, they experienced this very painful experience in the minus 20 temperatures. So that was the first lessons we learned. But you know, at that time, the line of the European Commission was, this is commercial dispute. This is Naftogaz, Gazprom. So please do solve your commercial disputes and don't involve us too much. I believe we're over this very, very superficial, irresponsible, basically, approach. So the second lesson is even more important, that critical infrastructure cannot be protected by efficiency. So in the peaceful time, the efficiency is criteria number one. So you tend to build huge power plants, thermal, others, and then you save money, you make the process more efficient to benefit your customers. But Ukraine discovered that system optimized for efficiency may lack resilience under attack. When Russians in April 2024 destroyed with one strike, with several missiles, the largest thermal power plant in Tripilya near Kyiv, so momentarily, several regions in Ukraine were cut off from electricity. So, and they continued to do it in Burштyn, in western Ukraine, then in Kurakhove in eastern Ukraine. So that was a strategy to do it. And we learned that it doesn't mean that resilience contradicts efficiency. I think we have to strive for both. But that means that it should be complementary and thought to how to compensate this already in the peaceful times. The third lesson, repair capability is as important as the generation capacity. Because especially in the extreme weather conditions, especially for big megapolises, for large cities like Kyiv or Dnipro or Kharkiv or Odessa, when this was overnight. There is no heating, there is no electricity, there is not enough generators that people put in next to their apartments or their houses. They should be repaired quickly. That means that they should be prepared, the repair team, that should be prepared maintenance equipment, there should be prepared the storages where you could quickly deliver it, and you should be aware of the tactics, that they should not be too quick to come to the place where the strike happened, because in 5-10 minutes, Russians are doing the second or repetitive strikes to kill already those who came to repair. All these elements of the experience, very important to share and to understand. Lesson number 4, and Jeff probably would understand it, it would reconfirm it with me, that private business is a security partner. You could not rely at such extreme situation only on government in terms of all the things that I already mentioned. Private companies, municipalities, logistic providers are part of this. So DTEC, the company that's very important for Ukraine energy security, proved to be a very reliable partner for the government, for the municipalities, because it's them, because of their capacities, their network, we survived these harsh winters. And I'm confident that if the next harsh winter is ahead of us, we will survive it too. The lesson number 5 is regional solidarity cannot begin after crisis. So the regional trust cannot be built overnight. It's very important, especially with the neighbors. Ukraine has 4 EU member states that are our neighbors: Poland, Hungary, Slovakia, and Romania. So, and proximity matters in this way. And where we are speaking about the shared storages, storage equipment, the interconnectors, all these elements, they need to be prepared, including the crisis planning and crisis management in advance, not after the catastrophe happened.
Grigory, could you wrap up?
And 2 last questions. Speed saves lives. How to restore electricity for millions within days, if not hours. That means that traditional procurement procedures at the time of the war, at the time of the crisis, do not work. So you have to be prepared for the emergency procurements and other elements of this. And last but not least, probably the most important for Ukraine in terms of overall understanding of its growing confidence, that domestic resilience, energy resilience, requires domestic capability. So it requires a manufacturing capability, it requires the domestic engineer, it requires skilled members. Without that, you cannot import just technology, you cannot just import the parts and to survive. And the final talk about the nuclear energy. I understand that that's a controversial to some countries present here issue, but for Ukraine, the nuclear energy proved to be a backbone of our resistance, while the flexibility came from other sources. Without the nuclear energy, Ukraine probably would face the energy collapse. But that requires also the understanding that the International Atomic Agency now only fit for the accidents, to dealing with the nuclear safety standards. It doesn't have prepared to be efficient while still playing the role at the nuclear power plants like Zaporizhzhia, the largest nuclear plant in Europe, became a battlefield. So, and in terms of the multilateral, my final world institutions, they proved to be basically useless, most of them. And there are 2 organizations in the world that has an access now, both to Ukraine and to Russia. The one is purely humanitarian body, ICRC, International Committee of Red Cross, and the other body, intergovernmental body, is International Atomic Agency. That's it. Not any others, not OSCE anymore, not Council of Europe, so just 2 of these. That requires also thinking what the institutional lessons should be learned to ensure when the conflict happens, armed conflict of such intensity like the Russia's war in Ukraine, what institutional reassurances involvement should come in addition to those just two bodies that I mentioned.
Very quick follow-up, because I've indulged you on your time because it was very interesting. But I want to just ask, you've since gone on the offensive precisely on energy. You're going after Russian energy supply with quite good effect. Don't you think Russia will also very quickly learn the same lessons that you've learned about resilience? So these attacks will be increasingly ineffective, even though they are impressively effective in the short term.
That's true. That's a very correct question to ask. And therefore, what Ambassador Pyatt mentioned, the things like the vertical corridor are important, but it shouldn't stop here, because Ukrainian competitive advantage to be a storage hub and to be a balancing actor. And in addition to this southern corridor, that Greece is a pivotal country to ensure its efficiency through Bulgaria and Romania, further to Moldova, we also think more about how to utilize underutilized potential of what I call the northern corridor, with the Norwegian, the US LNG coming via Baltic interconnectors and Poland to Ukraine and further to Central or Southeastern Europe as well. So those are multiplied, with Russia lacking. So they have always considered that the space and the strategic depth is their competitive advantage. But now, as this war showed, the interconnectedness and the positive interdependence, the timely things that happen, mobility, helps. Russia now, when they prevented their cut of their golden eggs, supplying Gazprom to Europe, they started to look at China. But it requires years and years to build the alternatives, the Siberian power gas pipeline and all of that. So I think Ukraine is much more prepared for that. But to achieve these tangible results, we need not to wait until Russia will learn and try to cut all these elements. I think we need to be two steps forward in advance, to be always ahead of these learning curve of the Russian.
Thank you. Domagoj.
Well, thank you, Daniel. Good day, everyone. I'm really honored to be here. Thank you for the invitation. And I would like to join in congratulating both Nectaria and her team and Economist for 30 years of continuous success. Well, I will be a bit of a devil's advocate, and unlike gentlemen here, I will deal with the context a bit more. So I would go back to the question you imposed on this panel: is a multipolar world order viable? And I think that question already assumes that we understand the nature of the world we are entering. And I'm not convinced that we really do. When you look most of our modern history, we explained international politics through the distribution of power between the states. And this is where we spoke about unipolarity, bipolarity, and multipolarity, because states were seen as the core organizers of order. And that's not the case anymore. They are still there, but we have power that is more distributed and even more fragmented. So I don't think that governments have this exclusive control over the forces that are shaping global politics, especially when you look at the energy and technology sector. So that changes not only who holds the power, but I think it changes how power behaves. And when you take a look at the fragmented power, you can see that it creates dependencies rather than balances. It produces systemic shocks rather than isolated crises. So instead of asking how many poles the world will have, I think we should ask whether the architecture of international order itself is basically fundamentally changing. Because now, what appears to be separate challenges are, in fact, expressions of the same structural transition. So this also changes the meaning of the energy security. We all know that energy is no longer just a commodity, you know. It has become strategic infrastructure. And with such infrastructure, I think that countries possess options. And I think optionality is power, too. And this is particularly relevant for Southeast Europe and the Eastern Mediterranean, because these regions, I would say, are becoming parts of Europe's strategic center because they connect energy, trade, security, infrastructure. And I'm not convinced that EU really understands still that fact. When we are talking about the EU yesterday, we all had the pleasure of listening to Enrico Letta. I admire him, really, you know, and his report is excellent. But I think he was overly optimistic when he spoke about a growing sense of European unity. And I would respectfully challenge that. I think we often in Europe confuse unity of reaction with unity of purpose. Yes, Europe has been remarkably good, it shows, in responding collectively to crisis. But what Europe still lacks, and it's connected to the energy security as well, is the agreement on the strategic destination beyond those crises. We have strong institutions, but we don't have European demos. And one cannot build political communities just with treaties, you know. So we can probably agree that the social Darwinism of Trump's America and the authoritarian nature of China's system are not the models that Europe should aspire to in any respect. The question is then, what should Europe aspire to instead? And I think it shouldn't be a single ideological model. It should be a resilient framework that protects the democracy, protects the rule of law, the single market and national diversity, allowing each member state to pursue its own path. And suddenly, when you think about that, the attitude towards enlargement and everything else should be changed. I think that Europe's strength has always been its ability to unite different nations around common rules rather than common identities. And to wrap up, my argument is very simple. We are no longer living through a temporary crisis within otherwise stable system. I think we are living through a structural transition in which the frameworks that once organized power, meaning, and decision-making no longer fit the world we are meant to govern. And that disorder that we are experiencing is not an interruption. And I think this is very important to understand. I think it is a new condition, you know? And it is something I deeply explore in my upcoming book called The New Disorder. And let me just conclude. I think that our greatest mistake is believing that increasingly complex problems can be solved with increasingly simple political narrative. And they cannot. The defining challenge of our time, for me, is not a prediction. Even my clients are coming to me for that. I think it is the intellectual adaptation. Okay. Thank you.
So a new way of thinking, also a subtle plug for your book, which I'm impressed by.
Thank you.
Listen, we're running well behind schedule for the event. This is not your fault. This is our fault as moderators for failing to discipline you enough. But I'm going to do a brave attempt now and say you each have 1 minute to either respond to something that somebody else has said or to say what you think would be the most important thing to happen over the coming year to improve the resilience and change the outlook in the energy and security sphere. So let's go in reverse order. Domagoj, why didn't you go first? 1 minute, please.
Well, very shortly, and to repeat myself, Europe should spend less time reacting to crisis and more time defining its long-term strategic objectives. That means investing in innovation, strengthening strategic infrastructure, reducing critical dependencies, and acting before external shocks force collective action. Somebody, I read it yesterday, said that Europe is basically giving a free internship to Silicon Valley because most of our smart people and human capital lives somewhere else. And that's not the case just when it comes to technology. It's a wider problem. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, for a long time I've been in opinion and continue to stake with it that this war is not about the territory. Russia does not need the territory, the largest country in the world in terms of the territory. This war about who will write rules of the new security order, including the energy part of it. So in this sense, I would see that the growing value of what people call sovereignty here, or strategic sovereignty, or domestic reliance on your resources that you have and utilize them. But what I'm speaking about, it should be sophisticated, confident, mature sovereignty, not a simplistic sovereignty that contradicts with the need to cooperate, to value interdependence, and to invest in this interdependence, including the energy area.
Well, on the title of this session, multipolar world, is it viable? We aren't living in the 90s, which was a unipolar situation. We are living in a multipolar world currently. We have the United States, we have the European Union, we have the emergence of China, India, the BRICS, and other configurations that necessitates a sense of collective responsibility. What is ludicrous is that in the 21st century and with the vast technological developments, the geopolitical architecture is still based on pre-World War I logic, which is the predominance, the competition that is a zero-sum game of total predominance and homogeny over others to extract interests. Rather, it was always the aspiration that it would be a world of cooperation on a rule-based order that provides the sense of justice and principles and moves humanity forward rather than setting it backwards. I think that is the fundamental challenge, is how do we extract ourselves from this adversarial situation and return to a situation of equitability. Here again, it's not only political equitability, but socio-economic equitability. And again, we are facing the challenge of the haves and have-nots when it comes to AI, its developments, the data centers, where they're placed, who controls them, how it's governed. All of these are issues that unfortunately are going to be a semblance of the continuing multipolar diversity of a negative nature, unfortunately.
I fear that we're hurtling very fast in the opposite direction, but Jeffrey, will you?
I'll be very fast, Daniel, and at the risk of sounding like somebody who is now fully transitioned from government to the private sector, I think an important principle in this energy space is that markets are king. I think Donald Trump has learned to his lament how true this is in his frustration over petrol prices in the United States. And I'm here, looking at Dora Bakuyanis in the front row, remembering our conversations soon after I arrived in Greece a decade ago. I think a Greece today, which is confident, increasingly extroverted, and whose companies are increasingly deployed across this whole crescent of crisis that stretches from the Strait of Hormuz to the Baltic Sea and Ukraine, is very well positioned to succeed in that environment. And I would argue for the United States, we actually have a very strong interest in anchoring a lot of our approach to this region in a strong alliance and a strong partnership with the Hellenic
I'm
Republic.
sorry, we can't take the diplomat out of you. You managed to extract a positive point at the end of all this. So.